Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator, and in this week's Field Friday segment, thought we'd kind of touch on again what we're kind of seeing in some of these cornfields now. We're after pollination. You can start to see how successful your pollination was in your fields and what other things are starting to show up. Earlier on we had talked about some insects and some things that we had for aphids and so forth, but probably you can go out now and see, start to get somewhat of a feel for how good the corn crop might be for you. I think there's going to be some separation between hybrids again with all this stress we've had with this dry weather and the heat we've had, but there's going to be, some good corn out there yet. But as far as if you're going out into the field just to see how things look, be observant on what you're seeing out there. I'm sure you will, but just some things to be looking for. In these drier situations we've got this year, there's a lot of nutrient deficiencies we've been battling all year. So on the bottom of the plants, if we're dry and then we're not able to take up enough nutrients, now that corn's trying to fill that ear, those kernels that it pollinated. If it doesn't have enough moisture around its roots to take up nutrients, it's going to start cannibalizing the stalk, especially the lower side to start with. We've had a lot of potassium deficiency show up all year. Probably the worst I've ever seen, but there's even a little bit of that still showing up now. The potassium needs are as good as done, but you can see on the outer edges of these leaves that are yellow towards the bottom of the plant, it's still trying to put a little bit of potassium into that plant, or into that ear, you might say. So it's sucking it out of the lower leaves. More common though right now is we're starting to see some of that bottom of the plant fire up with nitrogen deficiency symptoms. You can see with this leaf, you've kind of got the center, it's like an inverse V. We've talked about before on that lower leaves, it's cannibalizing it off of the bottom. And that's, again, it's an indication it's trying to fill those kernels and it needs nitrogen to do so. I know for a fact this plot that this picture is in, this is not a plot that's short of nitrogen, but the moisture has kind of led to the deficiency since we haven't had enough moisture to take it up. A couple other things you're seeing now on some of these drier fields especially, there's a lot of spider mites showing up yet, especially as we get west. You can see, kind of some really disturbing looking leaves on the lower side of the plant where there's a lot of spider mites. You can kind of see these pictures with the underside kind of being, it's almost like it's fuzzy. It's a lot of little spider webs from the spider mites. And if you have really good eyes, you can maybe see them crawling around. But notice that you can see them in some of these drier fields. If it's up to the ear leaf, it's more concerning because there's that much of a population. Spider mites typically they don't chew on anything. They just suck sugars out of the plant. They're super tiny, so they don't take, by themselves up much. But there's so many of them in some of these fields that could be a problem. You can still see some aphids out there. That's not, not uncommon yet either. Hopefully we either sprayed them or we have some predators that are keeping them in check. But again, they're sucking sugars out of that plant. And with drought stress, none of that stuff's going to help our end of the season stalks. So as you go out and look, you'll see some different stages, different hybrids, maybe pollinated earlier or later, but most everything is getting to be brown silk here. If it's not, it will be shortly. But as you look out into these, as you're walking through, you can see, this is the edge of a field, but, some of this has been pollinated for a while, but I don't know how well you can see that, but you can see there's brown silk with a few non-dried silks, you might say. I've got a better close-up picture here, but silks will keep growing until they get pollinated. If you're walking along and you see these brown silks with some of the, the whiter or yellow silks yet, that probably is telling you the tip of that ear did not get pollinated. The pollen shed was done before all the silks came out, and usually the last thing that comes out for silks is the tip of the ear. So you could see that, probably more than you normally would this year in these drier areas. So that's something to be aware of. As you husk back ears, you can tell how pollination went as well. I've got a couple of ear examples here. These are all three from the same field, 3 different hybrids. One's a little bit earlier, that's a little bit further along, but if you look at this one, this first one had a lot more trouble. It didn't handle the heat and dry weather very well. You can see it's tipped back some, and it's got a zipper ear that we call it. The bottom of that ear, as that ear lays out, it didn't pollinate as well, and you can see it either pollinated later, so the other kernels around it on the other side of the ear were pollinated quicker, and they're bigger, and you know, you can just see it just doesn't look right. Those ears concern me if you've got a lot of those in a specific field or a specific hybrid, because those probably are not going to have a proper butt attachment where that ear attaches to the butt. They could be dropping ears at harvest time if you're, you know, if you're curious what the damage could be beyond the yield. So be aware of that. This next one, you can see it tip back some, but it doesn't have the zipper ear effect. Be a little less yield, but hopefully we get good kernel depth if we get some moisture and can finish this crop well. And then the last one looks like it handled it better than the other two. Looks pretty decent. So there is going to be some variability this year. But the other thing to be aware of, obviously, is if there's any diseases out there, whether it got sprayed with fungicide or not, just be noting what's there. The one thing you will probably see in about every field, it looks like a disease, but it's really not. This purple leaf sheath is what it's called. If you get where that leaf attaches to the stem, I don't know, I have a better picture here. You can basically see where all the pollen and any dust or anything that's ended up on those leaves, got enough dew, or maybe even got lucky enough to have a little rain, washed that down into that, you know, the base of that leaf and around the stalk. That kind of just rots, you might say, all that old pollen and whatever, and it kind of disrupts the way that leaf sheath looks. It looks worse than it is. It really doesn't bother anything. If you peel it away, you can kind of see that it does not get into the rind of the stalk. It's just that sheath. So you will see that. That's not a disease. That's just something you're probably going to see. If there's something on the actual leaves, that's more likely what you're kind of looking for as far as if you have diseases, and then we got to figure out which one it is. They're far too numerous to show all examples of now, but if you see something, ask your CFE agronomist. But just wanted to touch on what I'm seeing, what to look for. I know guys are maybe starting to get out into the fields and wanted to see how pollination went, what yield potential we have. So just some things to be aware of. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.